Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and I'm preparing to feed one of my worm bins. It's a system that's got some African night crawlers in it. The system's been around for 210 days now, that's 30 weeks, over which time it's received, I believe, 13 feedings, and it was 13 days ago when we last checked in on this system. It's got a little bit of an unusual setup over here, if you look closely. It looks very similar to all my other systems, with the exception of that thing resting in the corner, which is just a plastic bag. It's a mesh bag that I'm treating as sort of a quarantine bag to hold some weird materials that was kind of scattered into the bedding, and I managed to kind of isolate it, and I thought I'd give it some time to see if the stuff will break down, and I've finally given up on it, and that's the reason it's sitting out on the top. The whole idea by putting it out there almost 2 weeks ago during the last check-in 13 days ago was to let the material dry to the point where hopefully the worms will just leave the material and then the bag can be simply removed. At some point later, I'll just shake the bag until all the castings drop out, you know, theoretically leaving me with all that weird material that I'm just trying to exclude from my finished castings collection. So we're going to get that system up on the bench. I'm going to slip on a glove and we're going to get to feeding them and see if we're ready to remove the quarantine bag. So let's get to work. The stuff that the worms are getting today is going to be a day's worth of coffee, including the coffee filter, and here I've got some stuff that was contributed by my mom yesterday. I threw it in the freezer last night, but I haven't really had a chance to look through what it was. I believe here we have a little piece of paper towel with some apple peels in it, and these are some potato peels, and the rest of this is cabbage. I'm not sure if there's other stuff in there, but that's what they're getting. I've also got a number of napkins that I salvaged from the dinner table after we finished eating, which we're going to include as bedding today as well. So let's first examine how our little quarantine bag situation's coming along to see if it's possibly succeeded in evicting its inhabitants. We'd been observing a good number of worms hanging out in this stuff, seeming to be pretty comfortable being in here. And I believe that the main reason for that was because the material had been pretty damp. This thing was really always just placed right down into the feeding zone of the bin, you know, in the hopes that it would be attracting a good bit of worm traffic to the material. Ugh, spam. Sorry for the interruption. We'll just let that thing keep buzzing over there. So what I was referring to earlier, I've shown this over and over. Most of you have probably seen it already, but this weird springy material, this stuff was actually in the previous system that these worms inhabited, from which they were moved 30 weeks ago, 210 days ago. So even then, this stuff was already presenting as a pain in the neck material, which I was really able to successfully catch when I was screening the material as I was harvesting it. So the worms got relocated. This stuff, I pondered what to do with it, and then I decided we would just place it in here in the hopes that maybe the worms will be able to break it down over time. But as you can see, there's a good bit of it in here. And my idea was that if I allowed this castings material to dry a little bit, it should shake right through this mesh bag, and then what would I be left with is the stuff that I've been trying to isolate and remove. But we're not going to spend time with that right now. It might take a few minutes for this stuff to shake through, but I believe we're pretty close to being depopulated. I mean, I don't think I saw any worms in here. So either way, we're going to set this aside, and I'm going to deal with this later. I'm not in a hurry to take care of this. I'd really probably like to see it dry further. So maybe we'll just return it to to its position here in the corner. Let it keep drying, because on the bottom it still feels kind of damp. Although I don't see any worms. I mean, we might have succeeded in convincing the worm that, oh, here we go. Here's one of the reasons we're waiting. Because worms are still hanging out in this stuff, and it's because the material here on the bottom is still pretty damp. I was actually thinking about maybe propping it up onto something, allowing for a little bit of airflow beneath it, perhaps allowing it to dry to the point where worms would really just want to get the heck out of it. But like I said, I'm going to put this off to the side, and we're just going to get to work feeding these little guys. Oh boy, what am I going to put this in? Alright, I should have been better prepared with some sort of a container to place that into. I just put it onto a piece of newspaper off on the side. So now, I guess, as far as feedings go, something that this bin was fed recently, not in the last feeding, but there were still leftovers remaining during the last feeding that we observed in here, was some parts of a couple sunflowers that the bin was fed. I don't even know, maybe 2 feedings ago. Probably puts it out about a month now that the sunflower was put in here. And I did attempt to simply position the sunflower right on top of the last feeding so that it'll be easy enough for us to encounter it right in the beginning as we come in to see how things are coming along with it. Last time it did appear as if very little progress had been made on it. But who knows, maybe it was just on the brink of kicking into high gear and perhaps it's already been consumed by the worms. I'm not sure. I think here we've actually bumped into a fairly good sized piece of tape, plastic cellophane tape, which clearly does not belong in a worm bin. Kind of makes me wonder how that got in there in the first place. Okay. I'm beginning to get the sense that maybe we're not going to see any leftovers of that flower. But who knows? I could be proven wrong as we continue to probe around. Well, I think I'm starting to feel something that could be parts of it. Something that seemed a little bit bigger. Who knows? Maybe we're just finding... This would seem to be banana peel. Yeah, I think that's what we're encountering here. This actually looks to me like something I remember from reviewing the video before coming down here, just to refresh my memory, was what appeared to be part of an uneaten banana. So some of it got eaten, some of it didn't. And I can still feel that there's still some, some banana in here. And you can see the worms are in there working it. Should we open it up? Yeah. Oh my goodness, they did a good job. They've gone right down to the bottom of it, even though we found a little bit of the leftover material out here, some of the banana. If you go right down to the very bottom of the little pocket, you can see that the worms are still busy in here, although there seems to be very little of what they probably got lured in here after in the first place. That's a cute little worm ball, and here's what's left of that banana peel. So they're doing a good job. This looks like some of my prepared bedding here. Kind of piled up into little jumbles. I guess I'm just going to sort of see if I can help that stuff blend in a little bit with the surrounding materials. I'm starting to think that I'm hoping that the flowers did get consumed. Okay, I'm just going to start tilling up this feeding area a little bit better to see what other types of leftovers we might encounter. But I think that those were really the only objects that I was kind of expecting to see some of. I guess I was only expecting to see some of the sunflower because there did appear to be so little breakdown of it last time we were in here. What on earth is this? Okay, interesting. Feels to me like I might not have prepared adequately because I don't even know what it is that we're looking at here, but it's a fairly substantial chunk of something. And it bothers me that I can't recall what it was. Kind of unusual how it's just hardly broken down at all, and it seems to be because it was sort of folded over on itself, possibly preventing breakdown. It almost seems like, I don't know, could it be that we fed bread or something? Something a little bit more unusual. Well, whatever, we're not going to ponder it too much, but I'm going to attempt to, sort of break it up a little bit, perhaps helping with the breakdown process going forward. I don't know, maybe I'll be reminded of what that was at some point going forward. But I think I will be checking the video from last time to see if I can refresh my memory on what that object was. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here. As you can see, it's whatever it was awfully fibrous. And it seems like the worms have done away with all the softer material in between all the fibers. And they'll work it all down gradually, but the fibers are, I guess, a little bit tougher material. It's going to take them a little bit more time to break down. Yeah, these worms are doing a really nice job in this system. And even though there's some leftovers, they're going to get that cabbage and those potato peels and stuff. So I'm attempting to open up a large enough crevice in here to fit today's feeding. I wasn't really going to use my prepared bedding, even though I spent some time over the past couple days creating lots and lots of shredded cardboard, shredded paper, and shredded brown paper bag. I've got 3 yellow buckets full of this stuff. Because I recently took 3 yellow buckets out of service, and now they're holding prepared bedding. Well, it's not even prepared bedding yet, it's just shredded raw materials. Normally I'll mix those sort of things together with some small bits of leaves and some moisture to create my prepared bedding, but right now I just don't happen to have any. I used the last of my supply yesterday during one of my feedings. So that was the reason I thought that we would just use napkins in today's feeding. So why don't we just start into the prep of their food, into their feeding area. These are going in dry, and I think we can maybe just apply a little bit of my my BTI solution, my mosquito dunk solution. I got my little squirt bottle over here with which we can spray in some of that stuff. Even though I don't see any signs of insect activity in here, I'm treating the application of the BTI in all my systems as more of a preventative measure at this point. I was running low, so yesterday I refilled the bottle, so I've got plenty in here. And I don't think we have to go overboard, but when I'm putting it in, I'm not so much after moistening, because the system doesn't even seem like it needs any moistening. To me, it seems like the moisture level in here is almost ideal. It's really more to just get the material in here, the BTI bacteria in here. So I've got 1 or 2 more of those napkins over there. So my mom usually has her girlfriends over once a week, and it's become sort of tradition for me to be there too, to hang out and visit in and get a free meal. It's always yummy stuff. And yesterday's meal consisted of cabbage and potato, sort of a little casserole, sort of a mixture, I guess. Or at least it was supposed to be a casserole, but the whole crew, I guess with the exception of the host, my mom, everyone seemed to think that the final step of blending all this stuff together into sort of a puree was not necessary. So we ended up eating it in a little different bit of a form than we usually do. There was just chunks of cabbage, chunks of potato, and it was really good. Can't complain. Although my mom probably would have preferred to have it prepared the way she likes to prepare it usually. But it's good to know that it can be eaten that way too. So the stuff I'm sprinkling in here is crushed eggshell, which is the stuff that I use as the grit in my worm bins, because the grit is something that the worms find useful when they're eating the foods that they're consuming. It goes into their gizzards with their food, and then it's not so much the form of nourishment. It just goes in alongside the foods that they're eating, and then it's utilized by their gizzard to help pulverize the food within their gizzard. So sort of a food additive, if you will. And the way I understand it, the worms are actually able to store some of that stuff for a rainy day. So even if you're not giving it to them, they might already have some stashed away just in case they do need it. And I see plenty of systems that are run without any grit at all, and the worms do fine too. So, you know, in due time, the the microscopic life in the system will gradually break all the materials in the bin down to the point where the worms can take advantage of it. I just suspect that the grit is something that allows the worms to get into stuff that they would otherwise be unable to break down. But all right, I think we managed to collect up all the leftover bits of food and return it to the feeding area. So I think the only other remaining thing to include is this little portion of coffee. So I'm going to sprinkle it across the top of the leftovers. And then a little something I often like to include in with the coffee is my worm chow. That's the last ingredient we're going to include in today's feeding. These being African night crawlers, they really do like their carbon-based food. So if you give them a lot of these kitchen scrap type foods and you give them bedding, a lot of times they're just as interested in eating the bedding, like the paper and the leaves and things like that, as the kitchen scraps. So to me it seems like a generous portion of bedding going into the African night crawler systems often counts almost as extra food. Things are looking really nice. I like to examine the outer edges of my bins usually just to make sure things out there look just as good as everywhere else. And they do, luckily. It's also nice to know that you're kind of being able to till it up and make sure that it's all aerated, not becoming compacted or, you know, too dense for the worms to be able to travel in and out of. I think I saw a pretty good number of worms out there, but maybe they've been lured into the center of the bin because of the food supply over there. But there were worms there, and you know, I think that's usually all I need to see just to make sure that it's still hospitable for the worms to be hanging out in. So we're going to check the other side here to make sure it's also the same. No reason to think it's going to be any different, but I just like to be sure. All right. On this side, maybe there's a little bit more moisture, possibly explaining why we see a little bit more worm activity out here. Anytime I bump into stuff that seems to be clumping, possibly due to a little bit excess moisture or whatever the case may be, I like to kind of break it up a little bit. Sometimes in the middle of it there's a little piece of leftover food or whatever. That's fine. This way at least I know I've dislodged it from being buried within a little boulder, and it has a renewed chance at being approached by the worms and consumed. This is just a piece of corn cob gradually getting broken down. I just thought that I had bumped into a little piece of sunflower, but that must be the end of the sunflowers. I didn't really see any sign of it whatsoever, even though it was still holding up quite good last week. Or no, not last week, 2 weeks ago when we were last in here. It does seem like the worms have done away with it at this point. Okay. And that little coffee filter, in case you're wondering why did I leave it out. I noticed that we didn't really have what I like to traditionally put out onto my systems as a feeding zone indicator to show where we last fed. So I like to put it right over where we last fed to help us zero back in on it next time we come in here, just in case things are moving around. And I guess coming back in here is going to be our quarantine bag, and I'm just going to relocate it right back to where we found it. Although, you know, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not in a hurry. We'll just take care of, you know, emptying that at some point in the future. Since I saw at least one worm crawling around within it, I think we're going to assume that there's others. We're just going to give that material a little bit more time to try to dry further. And at some point, hopefully it'll be devoid of any activity, worm presence. And then we'll be able to shake the contents until we get all of our castings and enable me to throw away all that weird debris that's mixed in. All right, well, we're almost done. I've still got a few things that I need to take care of putting away and cleaning up, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's all boring. Before I go really quick, though, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.